My boyfriend and I had been together for 3 years, and during that time, I thought we were inseparable. It felt like we had built something strong, something unbreakable. We had our share of ups and downs, of course, but I never once questioned the love we shared. It was solid, or at least that's how I felt. But everything changed the moment I made the decision to go abroad for a student exchange program. I was 23 at the time, and it felt like the perfect opportunity to stretch myself, to grow and learn in a completely new environment. I was excited about the chance to experience a different culture, meet new people, and gain a broader perspective on the world. But at the same time, it was terrifying. Leaving behind everything familiar, my family, my friends, my boyfriend, felt like stepping into the unknown. I never expected that my decision to go abroad would unravel everything I thought was solid between us. We had always been close, even though we had our occasional disagreements. We'd had our fair share of arguments, sure, but nothing that made me believe we couldn't get through it. I always thought we were strong enough to weather any storm together. But when I left for Europe, everything started to shift. My boyfriend, who was 25, wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of us being apart. In fact, he was vocal about his discomfort with the whole idea. He would constantly talk about how long-distance relationships never worked, about how hard it was going to be. His words made me nervous, but I tried to reassure him that we could make it work, that we would find a way to stay connected. He kept saying he had physical needs, and honestly, that made me uncomfortable. But I tried to be understanding, to remind myself that we had always been good at communicating, that we would find a way through this too. We agreed to give it a shot, and we promised each other we would stay in touch as much as possible. The night before I left, he gave me a shirt that said, "I love my boyfriend," on it, something I still have, and he wrote me letters that I kept in a box, trying to hold on to the love we had. He told me that he believed in us, that we could make it through anything, even if we were far apart. But as I boarded that plane, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind that things were going to change. The first few weeks abroad were harder than I thought they would be. I thought I was prepared for the transition, but the culture shock hit me harder than I ever anticipated. I missed home more than I cared to admit. The food, the language, the people, I felt like an outsider in every way. My classmates were nice enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't fit in. I missed the comfort of my old life, the ease of being surrounded by people who understood me. I wasn't prepared for how lonely I would feel, despite being surrounded by new faces. I started spiraling into this overwhelming sense of isolation. I didn't want to admit it to anyone, not even to myself, but I felt completely alone. One night, feeling especially down, I decided to call him. I needed to hear a familiar voice, to be reminded that I wasn't entirely alone in the world. But when he answered the phone, he wasn't there for me the way I had expected. He was distant. He told me he was busy, that he didn't have time to talk. The coldness in his voice hit me like a slap in the face. In the past, he would have dropped everything to comfort me, to reassure me that everything would be okay. But now, I felt like I was just another inconvenience to him. We ended up fighting. I tried to explain how hard it was for me, how I needed him more than ever, but it felt like he just didn't understand. His response was sharp and defensive, and it stung more than I cared to admit. After that argument, I held on to the hope that we could fix things, that this was just a rough patch. He promised he would work on communicating better, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A week later, he called me with surprising news. He had found cheap flights to Europe and was thinking about visiting me. I was thrilled at the thought of seeing him, of having the chance to reconnect and fix the distance that was growing between us. It felt like a sign that maybe we could make it through this, that we could overcome the challenges of being apart. But just as quickly as he brought it up, he pulled back. He got cold feet, and we ended up fighting again. The frustration and confusion I felt were overwhelming. But then, after a few more days of back and forth, he finally booked the flight. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel hopeful again. Maybe we were going to be okay. But then, the day before he was supposed to visit, everything fell apart. He blew up over something trivial, something that, in hindsight, seems so insignificant. But at the time, it was devastating. He told me I was disgusting, that he didn't want me in his life anymore, that he didn't love me, that he didn't even like me as a person. I was blindsided. Just an hour earlier, we had been exchanging words of affection, promising each other that we would make it through. It didn't make sense. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sent me a message telling me that he wanted to break up, that he wasn't coming to visit, that he was done. He canceled everything, his flight, his plans, and blocked me on FaceTime. He deleted my contact, and I was left standing there, shattered. I couldn't process it. I was so confused and lost. The worst part was that I had an important exam the next day, and I couldn't even focus on studying. How could I concentrate on anything when my whole world was falling apart? But I tried. I tried to push through, hoping that maybe, somehow, I could make it through the day. I decided to give him some space, hoping he would come to his senses. After all, he had a habit of saying things in anger that he didn't really mean. But as the days passed, it became clearer that this wasn't a mistake. His last message felt final. He said the relationship wasn't working, that he wanted to end things for good. I considered flying back home, hoping that maybe a face-to-face conversation would give me the answers I needed. But when I asked him if I should come back, his response was cold and harsh. He told me it would only make things worse, that if I came back, he would just resent me more. I didn't know what to do. I felt so lost. That's when I asked him if there was someone else, and his response was even colder than I could have imagined. "Don't disgust me further," he said, and in that moment I knew the relationship was truly over. He had mentally checked out long before he had ended things with me. The days after that were a blur. I spent them in a haze of confusion, self-blame, and heartache. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head, wondering what I had missed, what I had done wrong. It was unbearable. But eventually, I came back home, 2 months later. I called him, hoping to meet in person and at least get some closure. But when I reached out, his response was just as cold as it had been when we broke up. He told me he had already said everything he needed to say in his last message, that there was nothing left to discuss. And then, the bombshell, he had already moved on. The truth came crashing down on me. He had started dating his manager shortly after ending things with me. It hurt more than I could describe. He had always told me that she was nothing more than a colleague, that they were just friends. But now, it all made sense. He had been spending time with her, going out, having fun, buying things he had never done with me. He had lied to me all along, and now, he was with her. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I felt sick to my stomach. The emotional toll was unbearable. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My body physically reacted to the pain. The more I found out, the worse it got. He had lied about her, about their relationship. He had told me she was unattractive, that their age gap was too large, that she was nothing to him. And now, there they were, together. The lies he had told me about her made me feel like I had been living in a fantasy, that everything I had believed about him had been a lie. It was almost too much to process. I decided to go to his place to collect my things, hoping that seeing him one last time might give me some sense of closure. But when I walked into his room, I found something that shocked me even more, a bottle of alcohol, a brand I knew he had always hated. That was when I realized how completely I had been deceived. I confronted him, and his response was cruel and heartless. He told me he didn't owe me any explanations, that he had checked out of the relationship long before it ended. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. It hit me then. I had been living in a fantasy, holding on to a version of him that didn't exist anymore. And it was all a lie. He had moved on, and I was left picking up the shattered pieces of my heart. The pain of it all was indescribable. I had supported him through everything, his struggles, his failures, his fears, but none of it seemed to matter. None of it had meant anything to him. After everything we'd been through, he had just thrown it all away, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. He was already with someone else, and I was left wondering if I had ever really meant anything to him at all. I wrote him one final message, telling him that I had always wanted him to be my endgame, that I had hoped we could grow old together. But now, I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to know what he was doing, who he was with. I just wanted to move on, to heal. The hurt still lingers, but I'm slowly starting to find a way to let go. But deep down, a part of me still wonders, will he ever regret losing me? Was I just a rebound? Or was I never enough? I don't have the answers yet. But one thing I know for sure is that this has been the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I thought I knew love, but now I know what it feels like to be betrayed by the person you trusted most. The heartache still hurts, but I'm beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something new. And I can only hope that one day, I'll heal enough to move on and never look back.